Greetings. My name is Michael Miller, and this is a Michael Miller Trademark training video out to you because you're listening. And to Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, to Cornu Core students, and back to you because you're listening. Gosh, it seems like forever since I've done a broadcast, and so bear with me because I'm not sure. This is about Cornu Tension in golf, G-O-L-F, golf. Because on February 14th, I got this email, if I may, that says, "Greetings, Michael. More than 20 years ago, I attended one of your teaching courses in St. Louis at Karen's studio." 20 years ago. I don't know this person. I can't picture what they look like. She goes on saying, "I was impressed by your identification of Cornu Tension and still am." So to me, that pleases me because she's saying that 20 years ago, I identified Cornu Tension, pointed it out to her, and of course I was doing it before then to have shared it with her then. But it's always great to have a student of yours acknowledge that they learned something, for me, from so long ago that impressed them then and still continues to impress them. Nowadays, I'm enjoying retirement living in Thailand. It was here that I came across a golf strategy called Tatahata. The identification of how athletes move reminded me of Cornu Tension. My point being that golf is ever expanding around the world, and your teachings, meaning mine, can apply in this field, meaning golf. Should you decide to explore another direction, which is an interesting way of putting it. People, she says, spend millions on golf lessons without getting the hip grip. Sincerely, her best wishes, and I named her Mattie in my fictionalized account of where this email has taken me, which is to try to follow her suggestion or live up to her encouragement to expose my teaching, which is about Cornu Tension, to the golf world. And because I think in a way because she points out that there's a lot of money spent on golf, that there is money to be made in sharing my teaching in the golf community. And I'd like to think this ends up relating to you because I think you're much more likely to do this and make money off of it than I am. Because the name of my domain is hermit.com for a reason. So, well, a later email made clear was she and her husband were retired, and only suggesting that in videos on YouTube, she watches a lot of golf swings on YouTube. It's obvious for her those that have the hip grip and those that don't. And so I think she's encouraging me to expose my view, my teaching, into the golf community because there's room for reception there that might be welcome. So, I designed what I'm going to write, because she said, just post to a couple of websites, golf websites. And so I thought, okay, what would I post to a golf website? Naive about what that would come to mean. And for me, I wrote a letter about Mattie that I heard from her. She wanted me to expose my teaching about the hip grip and Cornu tension, you know, like two separate things, one sort of built inside the other, but to the golf world. And so I wrote an email that explained why I was writing this letter, this post, because of Mattie and the hip grip and Cornu tension, and that in part one, the hip grip is about this. Is about, to me, the obvious fact that the human body stabilizes itself by making a grip at the hips. It's a grip, and it being a grip is rotational in nature, and it's through the control of the rotational dynamic that you stabilize along the axis that runs through the hips, or this end point. Because if you're looking at it straight down the line, all you see is the end point, right? So I hope to add the letter to the notes in this video, and do it as well in the extension of this YouTube video into a post on Facebook. So, my number one topic, I only have two topics today really. The first one I'm talking about is Michael Miller Trademark training materials. This is a trademark, and under that trademark, I'm selling training materials, and the training materials I'm selling are word-for-word instructions. In this case, what I'm selling are the word-for-word instructions on how to create Cornu tension from your ears to your shoulders. Okay? And why am I doing that? Because it's the easiest to point out, it's the easiest to embrace sensationally, and once you can say, oh, I feel that, in the sense that you do something that creates tension, if you will, and that by rotating in opposite directions between two axes, it's how you're creating that sensation. And once you can sort of figure it out in your body to create the sensation that you can feel, you can recognize Cornu tension for what it is. In the body, oppositional rotation between axes. Okay? Now, when it comes to the hip grip, and until Mattie said that, I'd never put those two words together that way. Perhaps because it could be poorly interpreted, but it is so succinct in two words and 8 characters. If you count the space between the two, or take the space out and just call it hip grip. But from the basis of what Mattie wrote to me that she wanted me to share with you is about the hip grip, her term for it. And of course, if you listen to my stuff, you know that I already point to the fact of the physics that the core is a grip at the hips. I just can't believe that most of the world doesn't already see it that way already as well. But obviously, it's her frustration if I introduced her something 20 years ago that she recognizes the value in then and now, and I think shows a frustration that the Pilates community isn't more hip to the hip grip, if you'll pardon my intention to be hip. So there were just 3 parts to this post I was intending to make. One explaining that the grip at the hips is no different than the grip at the hand. It's muscular, and it inherently creates an axis of rotation that grip in establishing itself creates. Right? No grip, no axis, no endpoint of rotation. So in paragraph 2, and remember, I'm trying to write a post to anybody familiar in golf that knows nothing about any of my background in Pilates at all. I'm not talking about Pilates. This is only about the hip grip and Cornu tension. And if you're a recent student of mine, or you're a student of mine for 20 years or more, you know the distinction because you've accomplished the physics, the biology of the physics in your own body. You got a feeling of it. So in part 1 was why, part 2 was that the core is a grip at the hips, that Mattie calls the hip grip, and that more golfers could use the hip grip, obviously, to control themselves more, and I would say it's to stabilize themselves more by how they engage their body, right? And that the hip grip, the core is the base, the primary axis of rotation that the body evolved out of controlling, and that through the length and establishment of the ability to rotate at the shoulders reached back. I mean, it's all vague and innuendo and supposition. On the one hand, but the very shape itself of the Cornu spiral, the Euler curve, is there. And the more you know about the curve, the more you can understand why the biology is naturally reaching into the configuration and the dynamic. So that's new for you in a way. Michael Miller is talking about configuration and dynamic of the Cornu tension. Because Cornu tension takes at least 2 axes to rotate in oppositional direction to one another to create that tension. And that you can do it from ears to shoulders easiest first. It's the easiest to cue and write directions for, instructions for, and it's the easiest to find the feeling of. And if you don't find any connection to it at all, from your ears to your shoulders, then there's really no point of reaching further to connect shoulders to hips, right? So it's really two very different things. I used to say rotation stabilizes movement. Okay, it does. You know, if I had my compass here, my gyroscope, I'd hold up my gyroscope. Rotation stabilizes movement. And the establishment of a rotational grip at the hips, you know, I don't want to be interpreted lewdly in my gesticulation. But to ignore the biology's construction, to ignore the fact that the spine, so this is looking at it from behind, and this is looking at your spine from the side. See all that rotation and all that roundness there? That rigid structure sits on the grip of rotational dynamic that the body engages to move through space. to escape the tiger and to dance on the stage. And then part 3 of the post I intended to share with the golf community was that I'm giving away the teaching for free by writing this information. And if you want to pay for the word-for-word instruction, that's what I do. This trademark represents training materials, you know, and health and fitness. And my plan is to ask you to send me an email address to which I go to PayPal and request payment for the training materials. In this case, a simple attachment to an email that has these instructions on it. And you can always just take what I've said spontaneously through this video and many others and just interpret it as you wish. But if you want the word-for-word synthesis of how I cue, how I instruct, I proclaim myself to be a Pilates instructor. I like to make money as a Pilates instructor. And by selling training materials that share those instructions, specific language techniques is how I grew up to think about them, that you don't have to worry about or recreate or make improvs on. You can sort of buy the poetry and own it for your own, in the sense that once you know how to deliver the words, you don't have to think about the expression to create or to deliver the instruction, to create the sensation. So that was my idea. And to send this email with an image of Cornu, just this, right? So that they could connect to the hip grip and my reference to oppositional rotation between ears and shoulders, and that they could buy training materials to get a word-for-word instruction on how to reach for that sensation. And it's to me, it gets. And then I thought, okay, I have what I want to say, and then I tried to go find places to post this. And as far as I know, there isn't any place to just go post something on the board, well, on a golf website. There are forums, and it's at a forum that you make a post. And to do that, you have to join and become, you know, a member. And that there are only so many forums. And so I went to 2 forums. I went to Sandtrap.com and to golfworks.com, W-R-K-S, something like that, and joined their forums and tried to make these submissions. And Golfworks I never heard back from. I don't think it ever got posted and never got feedback on. And Sandtrap at least immediately got challenged or sanctioned or said you can't do this. And to me, I headed down the path that I most truly wanted to head, and thinking better to seek permission or seek forgiveness than find a permission and get interaction. I got sidelined by a member, and then an administrator came on and said, oh, he was right to do that, and you can't do this and that, and I changed your name from Michael Miller Trademark to Michael Miller. And so now, recognizing the world that I've tried to dent with the concept of the hip grip, that the core is a grip at the hips, is monumental enough. But then to then want to point to Cornu Tension, a means of creating a tension between rotation, between axes at the ears and the shoulders, and that, you know, it doesn't take far or to leap long to recognize that you can connect that then from shoulders to hips, and that a lot of golf is controlling your body from your hips to shoulders to ears. Now, I'm not ignoring the knees, the ankles, and the balls of the feet, but it's just looking at a profile of a golfer and attaching Cornu to it. There's a lot of meat there to offer a person that wants to better their game and perhaps find something in Cornu Tension that wasn't there before. And that sort of implicitly means that you accept this whole idea of rotation between axes, and that your hips is just the primary axes that you establish control around as a human being. It's your powerhouse. So in my vernacular, you know, I don't split hairs. The core is the grip at the hip. And for it to be a core, it has to be a grip. See, that's the cutter. It's not just a squeeze of muscles. It's a unified contraction affecting a grip, and thereby getting all of the stability by being able to hold a dynamic, a rotational dynamic. So, in that whole process, I now realize that to ingratiate myself to the community, in order to share what a student of mine is encouraging me to share, I don't know what to do next, and I don't know whether or not I'm brave enough to want to even open up the exposure of that in such a broad way, in such a public forum of that specific interest. Well, the hermit comes out of me, and I'm not sure I'm ready to do that. And so, if this is an old recording, I hope that you take it as an opportunity for you to take it into that arena. No matter what else you do. You know, I don't care if you teach Pilates or yoga or martial arts or dance or gymnastics. It's all the human body. It's all the biology and the physics. And Cornu Tension is all about the fact of the physics that the body uses to move through space. That's how I put it. And so, I think if I'm going to pursue that whole golf exposure thing, which I'm not sure at all I want to go in, I would go on really and explain whatever connection I have to golf, whatever my experience is with golf, and try to make some kind of commonality on the ground that I'm standing on or trying to interact with. Try to not embarrass myself, and I'm not sure I can do that. Though I've had plenty of exposure at trying. Anybody that looks like me has to have a special place in the way people perceive you, me, because I look like a famous actor in a movie about golf, and it's not the most complimentary character in the world, but it certainly might apply to how good I am at golf and how well I fit into a golf culture. Much more would I choose to be Chevy Chase, but the visual appearance sets up perhaps the misconception about the value of the teachings that are involved. And it's not a lot of teachings, it's just pointing to look at the human body and the musculature and the fact that at the hips it establishes a hip grip. Thank you, Mattie, for that term. And that hip grip is just part of the other grips that the body engages in. to engage the musculature to support the load as easily as possible, so that you're as light as possible in space by how you engage your musculature. All right, and then number two, well, I'm talking about that now. Oh, number two, okay. There's another new fan I have that gives me hope that Passion to Know More will ultimately expose my teachings to everyone as well, because why? Because why? Because of why? Because people that really want to know why aren't that far from people that really want to know the truth. Because sometimes when you know why, when you can recognize why, that's a revelation of its own truth, right? Because without a why, there might be truth, but when you understand why, it's much easier to recognize the truth. Okay? I don't know. That would be a good philosophical discussion. But from that point of view, about someone passionate about a new student of mine has taken up, is in the realm of, in text, being all in lowercase. But it puts Michael Miller Pilates all as MMP in all lowercase. And the student casualness with her language puts out the simplicity and elegance of MMP in lowercase that I find very appealing visually and sentimentally. And I'm standing in the midst of really trying to distinguish MMP relative to Cornu Tension. And I think it's important for you as a Pilates instructor, because I'm projecting this to you, hoping to help you survive as a Pilates instructor. But see, in regards to Cornu Tension, you can survive instructing Cornu Tension and not teach anything else, not teach Pilates, or you can, well, in this instance, or this kind of broadcast, you can be a golf pro, and you can teach Cornu Tension as part of what you teach, and never have to use the word Pilates. See? Because Cornu Tension is about the biomechanical fact of the physics of how the body engages itself to move through space. And in the movement, or having the capacity to move, also stabilize. And so when you know that adduction between the legs, when the legs squeeze together, it helps deepen the grip at the hips. You can be standing there addressing a golf ball and either be a melting candle and your energy is just rooted out and flowing out into the earth. But in my kind of view of things, the draw in of the tension between the metatarsals and the ankles and the knees all draws into a tension that deepens and the grip at the hip, and thereby gives you more stability. And from the oppositional rotation, hips to shoulders, and shoulders to ears. So Cornu Tension is a means of engaging our body. And Michael Miller Pilates is a view of Pilates among which there are many, thousands. Everybody has their own view of Pilates, right? It's just that MMP points to the ideal within Joe's original work. And if one exists, it will not only be apparent to anyone who looks for it, but it will defend itself against every other interpretation, because the ideal will always be what it is, for what it is, regardless of appurtenances applied for any other reason. Little m, little p, little m, little m, little p. Michael Miller Pilates. Uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement, right? And you can explain how those words come from the original work of Joe, because all you're doing is taking effectively Joe's book and reaching for an experience that's possible when performing his choreography, his exercises. But there's sequence to the exercises, so in that regard, I consider it choreography. It has to flow, right? It has to flow. Looks like there's a shade right here. It's the lighting. Or maybe it's the 5 pounds I put on recently because I've been indulging in food. All right, so I plan on putting the letter I was going to post to the golfing community in the text, in the comment area to this video, if it fits. And if it doesn't fit, I'll put a link to my blog, which is where it will surely end up as well. Maybe I should do that first. Want to do that first. I don't know. I have a question I want to leave you with, sort of. It's my number 2 on my list, and that is, I'm trying to make the point that you can get to Cornu Tension on your own and own it for yourself and teach it to others regardless of what else you do. You can be leading any group of people in any kind of movement and guide them towards Cornu Tension, towards establishing a grip at the hips, right? And so I feel I'm in a hurry. I don't know why. As an instructor, the more physically impaired or limited your student is, the more you are open to engage them intellectually for what they may have an impossibility to do in their body in the moment that you're dealing with them as an instructor. To the extent that 20 years ago you can introduce and identify Cornu Tension for someone, that's as much of an intellectual thing as it is just pointing to an image or talking about it, subjectively. Well, it's all subjective, maybe, I don't know. My question is, do you need Michael Miller Pilates to get to Cornu Tension? Do you need Cornu Tension to get to Michael Miller Pilates? And will the Pilates world that this all grew out of not really even engage in looking at Michael Miller Pilates until Cornu Tension is out there in the world at large and draws people into Michael Miller Pilates because of the credibility in Cornu Tension? I don't know. The point I would want to make with you is that it's important to be able to separate the two to survive as an instructor, because the more you understand what it is you're instructing and why and where it comes from, the stronger you are as an instructor, the better your results are. You don't have to be a Pilates instructor or know anything about Pilates to help a person find cornu tension between their ears and their shoulders. And so I think you can easily get to cornu tension without Michael Miller Pilates at all. And in some ways, cornu tension is for every body, whereas the Pilates method isn't for everybody, either physically or intellectually. And yet, if you engage in it, it produces the results promised, like uniform development. Right? Okay. So my notes in terms of number one was Michael Miller Trademark training materials, and I'm selling the word-for-word instructions. After you send me an email, that we go from there on. Okay. And I do that for me, looking for a means of making money as a Pilates instructor. And I do it for you because what you offer for instruction will probably be much better than what I do and more popular. So use it as an example of how to sell your own training materials. I just know that what I'm doing is taking my trademark and establishing training materials that I'm selling under this mark. So in this whole golf interest thing, whatever, I hope that it hasn't been belabored about Pilates, and that as a golfer it can help to have a hip grip. And if you're going to buy into the hip grip, you might as well buy into cornu tension. And if something works, there's just no looking back from it, right? And if it doesn't work, then it's just, you know, the baseball hat with the thingy hanging down. Okay. As an instructor, as a Pilates instructor, I'm teaching toward the performance of the original mat work. And in the experience of it, that I choreographed Joe's choreography and hopefully Joe's energy to produce the experience that you're after. Because I think that Pilates is complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. Right? You've heard this. As a state of being in the body in the moment of the doing. Right? And that clarifies further to spirit is the observer, acknowledged now in physics, that influences the reality in which it participates in. My paraphrase. Not too bad though. You have to pay attention. You have to be fully concentrated on the purpose of the exercises as you perform them. I think those are Joe's words, almost word for word, right? There's got to be Geist. Within the Michael Miller Pilates view, within that little m, little p, Michael Miller Pilates, as a Pilates instructor, you take what you understand about the idea and blend it in with everything else that makes you more of the unique creature that you are, the precious, unique, gifted instructor, teacher that you are. And hopefully it helps you survive as a Pilates instructor. Now, the other thing is Cornu Tension and how it might help a golfer to understand that there's a grip at the hip and that that grip actually interacts with other grips in the body. And then all of a sudden you start playing with an awareness that Cornu Tension is real and that you can engage it in it, that gives sensational feedback, like alignment. You can tell alignment between the two axes, right? I was a terrible golfer. Growing up, my father looked at me and said, for such a natural athlete, I don't know why you play the way you do. He was kind about it. But I just had a terrible swing and it just wasn't my game. And yet here I am in a lifetime outside of the world of golf and getting involved in body dynamics that somebody from 20 years ago learned from me might help other golfers she sees in the world out there to get a grip, a hip grip. All right, so blah, blah. That's what I hope that you do as Pilates instructors is understand Michael Miller Pilates, one of many ways of looking at Pilates, and understand Cornu Tension, which I think is just a fact of the biology accomplishing the physics. And so in that regard, the email from over 20 years ago that acknowledges that I identified Cornu Tension, see, that's what I'm helping you understand is the expression of the fact that it's an identification of something. It's not me making up a symbol or having a subjective interpretation of the way the body works. The body works in oppositional rotation between axes, and it seeks the shape of the Cornu spiral because of the effect that shape has on the physics our body finds itself in space, how heavy it is, under what tensions it exists in. All right. It's always been such a weird thing to get challenged into writing words, because for me it's an involved thing. And coming live like this is so much easier and more spontaneous. I think many of you will appreciate just the words themselves that you can read in about 30 seconds, maybe a little longer, and get the kernel of it, the meat of it, the core of it, right? Live can't live forever. Read between the lines. See behind the curtain. Add 2 and 2. I want to say something profound about truth, but I can't. I don't know what to say. I'll have to think about it. Direct your thinking, and what's last? To make it first and foremost in your mind. Geist.